Recording. Okay. So, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the resumption of routine academic activities of the Nephrology Society after COVID, after West Zone, and the hangover of West Zone. So, finally, we are resuming our monthly meetings. We will initially as I was telling Prashant, we used to have this as breakfast meeting, but now I don't know whether we can call it a supper meeting, but they have become more, the need of the hour is to make it virtual. So let's hope next year we are able to have physical meetings. So to begin with, we have the youngest member of the society to start the proceedings. Dr. Prashant Malviya has recently joined the Nephrology Society and has arrived at Akola, and he has started his own venture. If Nishant is able to, because Nishant
Yes, sure,
is
sir.
supposed to formally introduce him.
Sure, sir.
And so the topic for today is diabetes management in chronic kidney disease, the KDIGO guidelines 2020. A lot of new things have appeared since there was any guideline for diabetes in CKD. And the biggest explosion has obviously happened in the SGLT2 inhibitor area. The gliptins have seen their days, and obviously they will continue to be a part of the armamentarium. So we'll get to hear in details from Prashant what are the new changes and what are the hierarchy of agents that we can use in CKD. To formally introduce him, I would request Nishant to introduce Prashant. Over to
Yes,
Nishant.
good evening, all of you. Today we have the pleasure of having Dr. Prashant Malviya for our very own academic meeting that is at the end of the month. And Dr. Prashant is joining us from Akola. He has got a very bright academic career, but before going on to his introduction, I would like to congratulate him for his own venture and all our best wishes to you, sir. Uh, Dr. Prashant Malviya has graduated from our very own Government Medical College, Nagpur. From there on, he has gone to do his medicine graduation, post-graduation from INS Ashwini, and then on to the prestigious Apollo Hospital, Hyderabad for his nephrology training. He has a extremely highlighted academic career. He has got several awards to his credit. To name only a few, he has got the first prize for his thesis dissertation. Congratulations, sir, for that. Second is that he has won numerous quiz competitions. He has almost stood first in all of the quiz competitions that were organized. One of them was in CMC Vellore, the other in Hyderabad. And the annual clinical meeting that is held in CMC Vellore, he has earned the first prize at the clinical case presentation there also. And all of us were fortunate to read your recent publication also that was on the percutaneous insertion of transhepatic permanent catheter. That was a wonderful read. On to you, sir. We are all eagerly waiting for your presentation.
Thank you very much, sir, to giving that kind introduction. And I will thank Ashwani Kumar sir and Deshpande sir, Nephrology Society, to allow me for giving this presentation. As we are aware, right, recently in the COVID era, we generally don't have the other meetings for other pathologies, but this is the to introduce, to have the talk on diabetes, because we have the first time the KDIGO has given some guideline or on the treatment of diabetes and CKD. So I think this is we should have discussion again and again on this. So to start with my talk will basically be on the first thing is about the KDIGO 2020 guideline. Second thing is like I will go from some basic things about how the diabetes affects the kidney, and then followed by some trials which has led to the KDIGO to give this change. I mean newer things in diabetes. So coming to what the changes the diabetes makes to the kidney, the first and most important change is the hemodynamic changes which happens in the glomerulus, where there is afferent arterial dilatation and efferent arterial vasoconstriction leading to glomerular hypertension. After which there is development of renal hypertrophy and mesangial matrix expansion. There are release of various inflammatory markers like IL-6, TGF-alpha, VEGF, ICAM-1, and that further damages the kidney. This is due to the EG which releases these inflammatory markers. The important parameter which has now recently has gained up like SGLT2, which is present over the proximal tubule. The SGLT2 is usually present over the S1 segment of the proximal tubule, while the SGLT1, which is present over the S3 segment of the proximal tubule. The SGLT2 are basically low affinity, high capacity transporters. It leads to the absorption of 90% of the glucose, filtered glucose, and SGLT1 is a high affinity, low capacity transporter, which leads to the reabsorption of the 10% of the glucose. So whenever there is a diabetes, whenever the glucose goes over the transport maximum of the glucose, and there is increase in reabsorption of there is increased reabsorption from this SGLT2 receptor, and there is increase in filtered glucose and excreted glucose. Now the proteinuria, which is present quite commonly, I mean, which leads to the diabetic nephropathy. In the theory behind this is the protein C, which is present, is usually activated form, and it helps for the anticoagulant and pro-fibrinolytic effect. But in diabetes, usually due to reduced thrombomodulin, it affects this protein C cycle, and that leads to the damage to the permeability of the glomerular wall, and that leads to the proteinuria. Further, there is damage to the tubules, and there is a formation of interstitial fibrosis due to the epithelial to membrane transition. So we know that gradually there is increase in prevalence of diabetes and also diabetic nephropathy overall, and that is the most common cause for ESRD in this even in India. So till now there were two important trials which there were so many drugs which came, but now till now only the proven therapy were ACE inhibitors or ARB, which has led to the regression of diabetic nephropathy. The renal and IDNT trial has shown this around 20% reduction in risk reduction in progression of diabetic nephropathy. So further, what happened now? Many drugs came, like they have tried pericalcitol, they have tried other many drugs for the diabetic nephropathy, but all the trials has failed to show some improvement in the diabetic nephropathy. Now the drugs which has come, anti-hyperglycemic drugs, mainly first one is came like SGLT2 inhibitors, and then GLP-1 receptor agonist. They have shown that they can decrease the progression of diabetic nephropathy. Coming to SGLT2 inhibitors. So SGLT2 inhibitors, as we know, as I've shown that it is decreases the reabsorption of both sodium and glucose from the proximal tubule, and leads to excess of secretion of the sugar from the tubules. It also increases the sodium uptake from the distal tubule, where it decreases where it is detected, and to the glomerular tubular feedback mechanism, it reverses the afferent arterial vasodilation, thus decreasing the glomerular hypertension. That helps it to decrease the glomerular pressure, decreases glucose, decreases arterial stiffness, decreases volume, decreases inflammation, decreases albuminuria, and overall oxidative stress is decreased. So initial trials which were done were DECLARE, CANVAS, and EMPIREC trial. They have shown the improvement in the decrease in progression of the renal disease in the diabetes, but these trials were done in the GFR above 60. After which the CREDENCE trial came. They have done this trial over the GFR of above 45, and they have shown the 30% decrease in cardiovascular and both renal outcomes. So it was quite helpful after this, and they have given the further way for SGLT2 inhibitors. One more is GLP-1 agonist. The leader trial, which came in 2017, they have shown that the liraglutide was helpful for 22% lower relative risk with the liraglutide. So now we'll come to our main topic, which is diabetes and CKD guidelines of 2020. They have divided these guidelines into the 5 chapters. The first chapter has been the comprehensive care in patients with diabetes and CKD. The second chapter is based on glycemic monitoring and targets in patients of diabetes. The third chapter is on lifestyle intervention. Fourth chapter on anti-hyperglycemic therapies. And fifth chapter is approach to the management of the patient with diabetes. So coming to the first chapter, the comprehensive care, they have given the 3-stage the pyramid in which we should care the diabetes and the CKD patients. In all the patients of the diabetes and CKD, we should have the exercise, nutrition, smoking cessation, glycemic control, blood pressure control, lipid management. Most of the diabetic patients will require RAS blockade, after which now the guideline says that the metformin and SGLT2 inhibitor should be given to the patients at the start only. And some patients may require antiplatelet therapies. So these are basically they have given the various dose and their titration according to the creatinine clearance of the ACE inhibitors and ARBs. One of the major problem with ACE inhibitors had been there will be initial rise with the creatinine after starting the ACE inhibitors, and there can be the problem of hyperkalemia. So what the guidelines says is we can tolerate up to 30% increase in creatinine of after starting ACE inhibitors or ARB. If there is less than 30% increase in creatinine, we should continue to the ACE inhibitors and ARB. But if there is more than 30% increase in creatinine, we should review for the causes of AKI, specifically the volume depletion, the diuretics, or NSAIDs abuse. And fourth is the bilateral renal artery stenosis. So if it is there, then we have to treat it, or we have to decrease the dose of ACE inhibitors or ARB. If there is hyperkalemia, again, we don't have to like stop it suddenly, this ACE inhibitor. We have to look for the cause for hyperkalemia, and we can check for other drugs which can cause increase in potassium. Initially, we can try with soda bicarb and GI cations exchangers to decrease the potassium, and then we can plan for reduce or stop ACE inhibitors or ARB as a last resort. We should advise contraception for all the women who is on ACE inhibitors or ARB. We can add on a mineral receptor antagonist for the effective management of the refractory hypertension, but we have to take into the consideration the hyperkalemia which takes place with the mineral receptor antagonist. Coming to glycemic monitoring, the second chapter, they discuss about what should be the ideal thing to monitor the glucose level in the blood. Always earlier also we used to monitor HbA1c, and now also the HbA1c seems to be a good option to monitor for the glycemic control. Generally the HbA1c level is falsely low in the patients who are having anemia, who receives transfusion in the CKD, or who receives the erythropoietin stimulating agents, and they can be falsely high in the patients who are having metabolic acidosis. So initial period of CKD, like initial stages of CKD from G1 to G3, definitely the HbA1c's reliability is good. The frequency should be, the monitoring should be a minimum twice per year or up to 4 times per year if we are not able to achieve the target level of sugar. Second thing is about in the stage 4th and stage 5, the reliability of the HbA1c is slightly low. So in that case, if suppose the reliability is low, or in these cases, the glucose management indicator, which is derived usually from the glucose monitoring, which is continuous glucose monitoring, can be used as a index glycemia for individuals in whom the HbA1c is not concordant with the directly measured blood glucose level. There is important role of self-monitoring of blood glucose level. because it helps to prevent hypoglycemic episodes. It helps to improve the glycemic control when anti-hyperglycemic therapy is associated with the, like we are giving sulfonylureas or other drugs, which increases the risk of hypoglycemia. For the patient with type 2 diabetes and CKD, we should not, we should choose the drugs accordingly. We should not choose the drugs which pose the high risk for hypoglycemic event. So basically, now the insulin, sulfonylureas, and there is high risk of hypoglycemia. So they should go for self-monitoring of blood glucose or continuous glucose monitoring rather than HbA1c. And the patients who are on metformin, SGLT2 inhibitors, GLP-1 receptor agonist, or DPP-4 inhibitor, the risk of hypoglycemia is less. So we can go for HbA1c in these cases. Again, the target for HbA1c, the target of HbA1c, either it should be less than 6.5% or less than 8%. This depends upon the various factors. One is the severity of CKD. Second is the macrovascular complications in them, comorbidities. If it is less, then we can target 6.5%. If it is more, we can target 8%. Life expectancy, hypoglycemic awareness, resources for hypoglycemia management, propensity of treatment to cause hypoglycemia. So these are all the factors which which can help us to decide that what target the HbA1c we should have. So like I already told that CGM or continuous glucose monitoring is quite an alternative to HbA1c in defining the glycemic targets. Coming to the third chapter, they have discussed about the lifestyle intervention in these patients. As we know that the CKD patients in the initial CKD stage, the diet should be high in vegetables, fruits, whole grains, fiber, legumes, plant-based proteins, unsaturated fats, and nuts. And this will help for the, as an antioxidant, this will help to decrease the progression of the CKD. Now coming to the protein intake, the diabetes and CKD, the initial protein intake should be restricted to 0.8 grams of protein per kg per day. And in the hemodialysis patient, and particularly in the peritoneal dialysis, the protein intake should be high, around 1 to 1.2 gram per kg per day. Sodium intake, we have the quality of evidence is very high that there should be very low salt intake, less than 2 gram or less than 5 gram of sodium chloride. It decreases the cardiovascular disease, it decreases the risk of stroke, and it decreases the progression of CKD. Lifestyle, the exercise part is very much important for the diabetic and CKD patient. They say that the diabetic and CKD, they should minimum undergo the moderate intensity physical activity for the cumulative duration of at least 150 minutes per week, or to level compatible with the cardiovascular or physical tolerance. They have divided this into the sedentary, light, moderate, and vigorous exercise. So they go for the, they ask the diabetic and CKD patient to go for moderate physical activity like brisk walking, biking, yoga, and swimming. The patient, we should assess for the initial baseline activity. After that, we should decide what activity to be given to this patient. If patient is already doing more than 150-minute walk or 150-minute exercise per week, we should go for muscle strengthening exercises. If it is less than 150-minute per week, we should recommend them to go for more than 150-minute per week, and then we should give them muscle strengthening exercises. If the patient falls into the sedentary lifestyle, we should assess for fall risk and comorbid burden, and then we should go for whether patient is low risk or high risk. If patient is low risk, we should initially start with low intensity activity, and if patient is high risk, we should see, and then we should refer to the exercise specialist. Glycemic management, the fourth and very important chapter in this KDIGO guideline is the glycemic management. This says that initially all the patients who are diabetic and initial stage of CKD, the first line of therapy should always be the metformin and SGLT2 inhibitors. This This after previous chapter, we have seen the physical activity, nutrition, and weight loss. The metformin and SGLT2 inhibitors can be given to all the patients who are having GGFR of more than 30. With the eGFR of less than 45, we should decrease the dose of metformin, and we should discontinue the metformin whenever the patient is started on dialysis. SGLT2 inhibitors should not be initiated if eGFR is less than 30. The second drug after the metformin, the third drug actually, the metformin SGLT2 inhibitor, the third drug of preferred drug should be the GLP-1 receptor agonist, which has shown to be quite beneficial. I will come further with GLP-1 receptor agonist. Other drugs which can be used are DPP-4 inhibitor, insulin, sulfonylureas, thiazolidinediones, and alpha glucosidase inhibitors. We have to take into the consideration various benefits and harm, especially with the SGLT2 inhibitors. We know that they cause genital myocardial infection, diabetic ketoacidosis. I will come to how the SGLT2 inhibitors leads to the diabetic ketoacidosis. And the few trials earlier, they have shown that amputations can be seen with the canagliflozin, but Credence trial has not shown that increases the risk of amputation. GLP-1 receptor agonist will cause GI side effects, and DPP-4 inhibitors has been shown to be a slightly possibility of heart failure, usually with the sexagliptin. So what they have given is, this one is a beautiful diagram they have given in the KDIGO guideline, is we have to prefer the anti-diabetic medication. This is like the third drug which we are going to add based upon the underlying comorbid conditions. Patients with heart failure, the patients who are having high risk of atherosclerotic vascular disease, or the patients who are having who require potent glucose lowering agent, then GLP-1 receptor agonist is quite helpful. The patients whom we have to avoid hypoglycemia, we can prefer GLP-1 receptor agonist or DPP-4 inhibitors. Of course, when we have to avoid the injections, we have to prefer DPP-4 inhibitors and thiazolidinediones. Now recently they have launched oral GLP-1 receptor agonist also, which can be taken orally. If we want to have weight loss, GLP-1 receptor agonist is quite helpful. Low cost is usually the sulfonylureas, thiazolidinediones, or glucosidase inhibitors. If GFR is less than 15, we have very minimal choices. We have either a DPP-4 inhibitor, insulin, and thiazolidinediones. So whenever the GFR is more than 30, initial choice has been always the metformin. How to monitor the metformin and how to look for because metformin is known to cause acidosis and decreases the vitamin B12 level. So if GFR is less than 30, definitely we have to stop the metformin. But if GFR is more than 60 or more than 45, it is between the 45 to 60, you can give the metformin. If GFR is less than 30 to or is less than 45 but more than 30, you have to decrease the dose of metformin to the half. You should check for vitamin B12 level actually at least annually for metformin for more than 4 years, because there is a risk for B12 deficiency. And we have to monitor for kidney function at least 3 to 6 months. If GFR is more than 30, we have to monitor the kidney function for every 3 to 6 months. Then again, based on the eGFR, you have to continue the dose or you have to decrease the dose. For SGLT2 inhibitors, if you are meeting the individualized glycemic target, you can lower the glycemic, you can simply add SGLT2 inhibitors. And based upon the, after adding the SGLT2 inhibitors, we have to educate the patient on the potential adverse effect and follow up on the control of the sugars. This I was talking about that how the SGLT2 inhibitors is known to cause ketoacidosis. The ketoacidosis is usually euglycemic ketoacidosis. SGLT2, by acting on the kidney, we have seen that it known to cause glycosuria and natriuresis. It also causes increase in ketone body's reabsorption from the kidney. And from the pancreas, it causes decrease in insulin secretion and increase in glucagon secretion, further which leads to lipolysis, free fatty acid formation, and that leads to increase in ketone formation. So this leads to the euglycemic ketoacidosis with SGLT2 inhibitors. Coming to SGLT2, I mean, they have told that SGLT2 inhibitors is prioritized and it has shown to have documented effect on kidney and cardiovascular benefit. We have to withhold the SGLT2 inhibitors whenever there is prolonged surgery, fasting, or critical medical illness. Then at that time, we should decrease or withhold the SGLT2 inhibitors. Whenever there is risk of hypovolemia, you should check for other causes like diuretics, which may cause hypovolemia before stopping the SGLT2 inhibitors. Once we have started the SGLT2 inhibitors, we can expect initial decrease in EGFR. This is usually reversible, and we can follow up the EGFR at the time with the patients on SGLT2 inhibitors. If suppose the patient is having, they are saying that the KDIGO guideline is saying once an SGLT2 inhibitor is initiated, it is reasonable to continue SGLT2 inhibitor even if GFR falls below 30, unless if it is not tolerated or kidney replacement therapy is initiated. So it is quite a big statement, like we can continue even if GFR falls less than 30. In a post-transplant setting, the SGLT2 inhibitors has not been studied adequately. So, and patient is on immunosuppression, so better we avoid SGLT2 inhibitors in these cases. Coming to long-acting GLP-1 receptor agonist, this is the third drug which we should add after the metformin and SGLT2 inhibitors. The effect, the GLP-1 receptor agonist, they have shown to have a good effect on the kidney. They are, because there are receptors on the endothelial cells, macrophages, and proximal tubular cells. They seem to have effect on protein kinase C pathway. They decreases the oxidative stress. They decrease the inflammation, which helps to increase in diuresis, natriuresis, and decrease in inflammation. That decreases the albuminuria, that decreases the mesangial expansion and GBM thickness, and they help for endothelial protection and restore the podocyte. So that's why the GLP-1 receptor agonist has come, has come on the priority list after SGLT2 inhibitors for the use for diabetic and CKD. The only problem is the GI side effect, in which we have to titrate the dose of GLP-1 receptor agonist. So there are various GLP-1 receptor agonists. Usually they are given a subcutaneous dose weekly once, or some can be given once daily, or but now semaglutide has come, which has been given orally, 3 mg, 7 mg, or 14 mg dose. Coming to the last chapter, which is approach to the management of the patient with diabetes, they recommend various educational program or self-management program which should be implemented in the diabetes and CKD. The healthcare system should consider implementing the structured self-management program for diabetes and CKD, and that should be for the local language, and that should be depend on the cultures. So what are the objectives of this language is like, they should improve the diabetes related knowledge, belief, and skills. They should improve the self-management and self-motivation. They should encourage the adoption and maintenance of healthy lifestyle. They should improve the vascular risk factor, increase the engagement with medications, glucose monitoring, and complication screening program, reduce the risk to prevent diabetes-related complication, improve the emotional, mental well-being, treatment satisfaction, and quality of life in the patients who are having diabetes and CKD. So this is the brief summary of KDIGO 2020 guideline. If there are any, I think I have few points for discussion. The first point is like, what are your experience about the GLP-1 receptor agonist? Because I have never used it. I don't know. And specifically, they are available mostly injectable forms. So I really don't know about GLP-1 receptor agonist. Second thing is about the complications. Like, are we preferring the patients who are having vascular disease, especially peripheral vascular disease, patient having amputation? Should we give SGLT2 inhibitors in this patient or not? This is still controversial. Third thing is about the monitoring of blood glucose. Though we prefer HbA1c, but how much of you do, give the, like, tell the patient to monitor and then inform us and then you modify the drugs. So these are like a point of discussion. Any other points we can have a discussion on that?
Thank you, Prashant. That was an excellent coverage of the guidelines. Dr. Acharya has already raised his hand at the beginning. I could not uh, ask him why. So we can start the discussion with Dr. Acharya. Dr. Acharya?
Prashant, till Dr.
Yes, sir.
Acharya,
Yes.
yeah. Uh, how do these guidelines differ from the previous one, if at all there was one on diabetes?
Yes, sir. Initially, there was declared DAPA and this declared trial. So what they have done, the GFR, when they have started, the GFR they have took as more than 60 in initial guideline. While the Credence trial, they have done in the lower GFR. They have done this study on the lower GFR. And what the Credence has done, they have done around a study on the 1,400 patients in, and they, after taking these patients, they have followed up for around this. I think guideline was continued for around 2 to 5 years, and then they have checked for checked for the complication of the complications, and they have checked for the progression of the CK fall in GFR in these patients, and fall in proteinuria. So basically, one thing is like the lower GFR, which is a differing point in Credence and the previous guideline. And the proteinuria, the average GFR in Credence was around 56, while in the previous guideline, the average GFR was around 85 to 90. So that is quite a significant difference in the Credence and previous guidelines. Sir?
Secondly, does appearance of proteinuria itself increases the risk of hypoglycemia with oral hypoglycemic agents, or it has necessarily to have a 1:1 correlation with declining serum creatinine, declining EGFR?
Of proteinuria, sir?
Yeah, I've seen patients whose EGFR is not very bad, but who have started to have proteinuria, and they were on oral hypoglycemics, and they have had terrible hypoglycemic episodes. So I was wondering whether even appearance of proteinuria itself would be an important indicator to reduce the stop OHS.
Sir, if we talk other OHS and SGLT2 inhibitor, what I know is this SGLT2 inhibitor and GLP-1 receptor agonist, the effect of hypoglycemia or decreasing sugar, it depends on the amount of or the blood glucose level. If amount of blood glucose level is very high, they will cause hypoglycemia, decreasing the sugar level. But if the sugar level is quite normal, there is very less chance of hypoglycemia with SGLT2 inhibitor and GLP-1 receptor agonist. Other oral hypoglycemic agents, I think, yes, sir, definitely there is chances of hypoglycemia is quite high because the mechanism of action is overall different. And now I think they are studying these SGLT2 inhibitors in non-diabetic proteinuric patient also. To see the effect of them to decrease the proteinuria. But yes, other oral hypoglycemic agent, yes, definitely they will cause hypoglycemia agent, even with
So amongst the insulin, if he's on dialysis, but prior to that, I put a patient on one long-acting insulin at bedtime, and if patient requires, then short-acting insulins before lunch and before dinner.
So we generally do give for long acting insulins in them. I mean, there's no harm in giving it.
No, I have not had any mishap in my experience.
So sir, what is your experience on GLP-1 receptor agonist, sir? I mean, I don't have any experience, sir.
No experience. No experience.
Because now, according to KDIGO, like it has come above sulfonylureas, thiazolidinone. So, should we, I mean, start using it or?
Maybe some diabetologists will be able to explore, because they are
Yes,
the ones
sir.
who will change over faster than us.
Yes, sir.
Prashant, that was a wonderful talk. And
Thank you, sir.
what I do is usually I refer the patient to endocrinologist, diabetologist, and I prefer not to manage blood sugars. So I straight away definitely refer the patients to endocrinologist.
Yes, sir.
So I
So,
have no
but-
idea about GLP-1 and all your questions. Just I can just maybe discuss with them and guide them or can tell them that we will like to prefer this drugs, as you pointed out rightly.
Yes.
But I have found that
Like,
continuous
sir.
glucose monitoring using the Abbott disc very useful in monitoring patients' blood sugars. You get 1,440 readings analyzed over 14 days time. So that is a very useful way to know where the sugars are spiking, when the sugars are spiking rather.
Dr. Acharya, initially you had raised a hand. What was the point that you wanted to make?
No, I did not ask any question at the time. I said hello. I just
Oh.
raised the hands like this and said hello.
Oh, okay.
Indeed, it was a very wonderful overview. All of us really got the taste of the new guidelines. Has it also spoken about the timing of initiation of dialysis in end-stage renal disease? Anything earlier than what is the normal norm?
No, sir. They have only discussed about the management part of anti-hyperglycemic agent.
Okay, so only the
Mm.
glycemic management has been discussed.
Yes, 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 sir.
Something about targets of monitoring. We would believe that HbA1c should be around 7, but I think the newer guidelines have relaxed that, and up to 8 or 8.5 is what should be acceptable
Yes.
now. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Specifically, I mean, especially if you are having comorbidities and the CKD stages are like 4, 5, we have to relax our HbA1c.
Sir, are we using HbA1c as a regular marker given its pitfall in end-stage renal disease in dialysis because they are constantly anemic? So, is HbA1c validated in ESRD and dialysis? Any thoughts about that?
Sir, like listen, KDIGO also, they says that it is not that much reliable in CKD stage 4 and 5 and ESRD patients. So they are saying that if we do the continuous glucose monitoring in these patients, that will be better option. At least we can do the self-monitoring of the blood glucose in these patients, I think. They should be on self-monitoring and they should have the chart of that. That will be the better option in this patient. Sir, just I mean, practical question, sir. Like, how is the costing issue? I mean, these Jardians, I mean, we give the SGLT2 inhibitors. Like, do you all prefer SGLT2 inhibitors now as a first choice or not?
Me, for one, have started to find the courage to write them, especially after reading Credence, that UTI is not higher and other issues are not as high in CKD as in the other population. So I have begun to sort of exploring the option. So I have few single digit patient number of patients on SGLT2.
Okay, sir.
Cost is a factor, yes. सर आपका आवाज नहीं आ रहा है. I think you are mute.
तुझको
नहीं आ रहा है. Yeah, any other points anyone else wants to? Manish?
Sir, I think we had a wonderful session. We can introduce this, Dr. Anand and Dr. Swapnil, and we can welcome them. I think we all are probably meeting them for the first time online.
Yes. Dr. Anand, welcome to the group. You have briefly introduced yourself on the WhatsApp group.
Thank you so
it's
much.
good to see you. Welcome to Nagpur. Welcome to the Nephrology Society.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir.
If you could reintroduce yourself, for the benefit of everyone.
Yeah. So I'm Anand, and I just joined AIIMS Nagpur as an assistant professor in the Department of Nephrology. So we are just in the process of setting up the department as of now, and hopefully soon we'll be having a dialysis unit, which should start functioning. And I basically belong to Tamil Nadu,